This video we will talk about what are binding property in JavaFX. So what is the binding property? Let's go back to the example we have earlier, show lines. So you run this program. Okay, so did you remember we have two lines? We try to make that in the very edge in our scene. We kind of cheat on that because we make our scene size is 200 and 200. So we have the coordinate 10, 10, 190 for the line. So they look like fine when you just run that. But remember, user can resize our window. So if the user resize our window, you can see here, the line didn't change with the scene we change, the scene size we change. So this one actually is not good afterward. So what we need to do is that we call the binding property. What mean the binding property? That means since my intention is to have the line always on the edge of my scene, so when I resize my windows, the line also needs to follow the size for my window to change. So this is what how we can do is we need to do the binding. So let me show you how they will look like after I can do the binding. So I will explain this example later. But here you will the same thing download show lines, but here is with the binding. So what happens if we do the show line with binding? So after you run this example for the show line with binding, you will see actually we have these two lines start with the edge. But when I resize my window, the two lines actually will follow the size change for my windows. So on the other hand, you can see what? We see the line 1 first. The line 1 actually only when you have your beginning node, they doesn't matter. Beginning always is 10, 10. But what is the end node? The end node xy actually will according to the size when I change for my width and the height. So they will change. So the same thing you see here for this line. This line actually, the green line, they will have this end node. They will change. X didn't change, still 10. But the Y will according to the height for my windows. So here the same thing. This one, this node, when I move the width, okay, the height doesn't change. They always is 10 because Y equal to 10. But one thing is when I change the width, they should change. So this one is we call the binding. That's me in line 1. Start X, start Y fine. But the end X and Y should be the same when the width and the height for the screen or the scene change. I also make the change as well. So that's what we call the binding property. The binding property means actually the node for xy coordinates, they will according to another value for your length and the width and the height for your screen. Does that make sense? Okay, so now I want to explain why they are binding property. I'm not sure earlier, did you notice when we see our line UML diagram, I told you I need to have start xy coordinate and the end xy coordinate, right? So usually you will see if that's a coordinate, my data type should be what? Should be double value. But all the JavaFX GUI UI component, you will see they don't use double. They call double property. So not only for line, if you go back to see the circle, the same thing earlier, we show you the circle, right? Circle, you have the center X and the Y and the radius. But in the UML diagram, again, the center X and Y and the radius, they are double property. So what this property means is earlier I told you about the binding property. in JavaFX, because they need to have some quantity for your coordinates, like your XY coordinate, they need to be changed associated with another value. So that's why we made the older value, the attribute become a property, become an object instead of a numeric number only. So that's why each your attribute in your line, they are not double value anymore. They are double property. So each property, they can bind with another property to change their value. So that's what we call the binding property. So the JavaFX introduced a new concept we call binding property. They enable a target object to be bound to a source object. So in our example earlier, our target object actually is our line. We need to be bound for our scene. The line, actually not the line, actually is the coordinate for our line is the target object. So that's XY coordinates, that double property need to bond with the source object. That's the width property and the height, the length property for our scene. So then in order to bind with that, you have your target property bind with your source property. So that's how we will bind with that. So kind of makes sense, right? So we see how we will do that. So that's why we back to our example here. So earlier that we show you they can be bind, right? So we see how they bind. So actually this one, when we have the bind property, we create another line pane. This pane is extend from the pane. So that still is a pane. But you can see pane, actually we will have all our object displays according to the coordinates. So I still create two lines, the line 1 and the line 2. So the line 1 actually, you can see, actually I just have their coordinates is 10, 10 for the start point, 10, 10 for endpoint. It doesn't matter for my endpoint as long as my start point is correct. Because like earlier we said, if you see when they bind, right, this one is line 1. So when we change the window, okay, so this endpoint coordinate will be changed. So that's why here we need to bind is the end xy. So now you don't call end x only. You have your line. So these two property we need to bind. So the property name, they call the attribute name with the property. So don't forget, actually, because they are a property now, you need to add parentheses. So this target property bind with what? Bind with our source property. So remember, you see x and y. Okay, so here the x coordinate will associate with the width. Okay, but here, because I don't want it to be exactly the same, I want to have the age 10, right? So that's why here, after you bind, right, you bind with this property, but you can do some math calculation. So then we dot subject 10. So the same thing for your end y coordinate, you need to bind with your height property. So here the width property and the height property, because it's from the pane. So because we are extend the line pane with the pane. So actually the line pane is one kind of pane. So for each pane, they also have their width property and the height property. So that's for the line 1, how we bind. But for the line 2, on line 2 you see again, line 2 actually is your x coordinates. It depends on where is your start and the end, but they have one point is this one. If we see this point, the x don't change, so that's y change. So that's why here we just consider this one is endpoint. So the end y will bind with the height property, again as subtract by 10. So that's the other node. This one is start node. But start node, y don't change. It's the x change with the width. So that's why you have start x property bind with your width property. So this one is how we will bind the property for your target object and bind with your source object property.